we got something that we think y'all are gonna like. It's David Mitchell rating the royals, basically trying to determine who was the best English monarch.
Basically, David Mitchell being David Mitchell.
Yeah, a typical Saturday night for David Mitchell.
This is something I feel like was just a baiting premise. Just, yeah, let's just talk about your favorite thing to talk about.
Yeah.
You know?
It'll be funny seeing him, not on a panel show, not as Mark Corrigan, but in something kind of serious.
And we might actually learn.
Yeah. We just need someone, Mark Corrigan, to tell us about this.
Yeah.
Anyway, are you ready?
Let's do it, man.
3, 2, 1.
They were all right bastards, basically. The standard of conduct is woefully below what we'd expect, even of Hollywood. What you have to do, you have to be horrible. They were all horrible. You have to be willing to kill at a moment's notice. I'm not keen on William the Conqueror, and I'm not keen on Edward the Confessor. I certainly feel that if they swapped roles, they'd both be very unhappy.
It's going to be one of those types of things.
Oh my God, this is going to be epic.
Yeah. David Mitchell might be the history teacher we all wanted.
Yeah, I feel like for some reason this just fits.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to enjoy this a lot more than I ever thought I would.
Yeah.
To what do we owe this great treat? Why are you a colossus delving into our little world of history? What's going on?
I started writing this book during the lockdown, when a lot of people are trying to write things, and I hadn't been. And then I started typing about the Vikings.
Oh, brilliant.
Because it occurred to me that COVID is a bit like the Vikings, in that it was a terrible thing that suddenly happened to an unsuspecting community. In the case of my typing, Anglo-Saxon England, and suddenly they were being Anglo-Saxon England in their way, and it wasn't a great life, but they were used to it. And then suddenly the Vikings turned up, and it was grim, and they didn't know why. They didn't know whether they'd stop turning up, whether they'd go away, and just thought that's one of the bleakest things about being a human being. Sometimes a bit of history just happens to you, and there's nothing you can do, and you're a victim of it, and you're not part of it, and you don't have agency. And the Anglo-Saxons, as we did, tried to give themselves some agency by saying it was their fault. And have all the talk about, yes, with COVID, we haven't been preparing enough for pandemics, or that somebody maybe ate a bat, or whatever it was. Let's please, as humanity, let's take ownership of it and make it something we've done to ourselves, rather than the more frightening thing, which is just something that's happening to us that has nothing to do with us and makes us not a villain, but just a victim. And that's what happened with the Vikings turning, and the Anglo-Saxons said, "Oh, it's God's cross with us. We haven't been praying enough. We haven't been holy enough." That wasn't why. It was just because that the socio-economic conditions in Scandinavia shifted slightly, as did maritime technology.
Yeah, you can't control the waters around the island, David, as we know. That's the ongoing problem in British history. So.
It used to be Vikings, now it's sewage.
Then they try. I've got images now of the monks on Lindisfarne attempting to sort of enforce social distancing. Sorry, can we just?
Well, it's the ultimate social distancing, just going to Lindisfarne, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, exactly. Why kings and queens? Why do we?
Oh God, there's so much of this that's just gonna go way over our heads, and we're just gonna have to go back and watch it multiple times.
This is gonna be but you know what though? I like his approach already, and I feel like he's just said everything that every dude that's getting up in age just wants to do. Just start writing about the Vikings. Like, fuck yeah, I feel that hit a weird level with me. Like, that connected with me oddly, and that's terrifying.
That's his version of World War II and barbecuing.
Yeah, I'm here for it. There's going to be a lot that he's going to put out there that I want to have to listen to it multiple times.
Oh yeah.
Because he's about to get into a piece of history that went so fast, was so complicated that I just don't remember that part of history class.
Yeah. Well, at least I'll give them credit, like, breaking it down, like the Vikings were like the pandemic.
Yeah. I was like, okay, I'll go with you on that. Thank you for breaking it down like that. I can
Yeah.
ingest that.
Yeah, that's a sign of a good teacher's
Yep.
being able to break something down so that someone who doesn't know it or isn't as keen on it can understand it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
This fun, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah, exactly. Why kings and queens? Why do we return? It's so interesting. We return time and again to this. Does it give us this? Does it give us a track and narrative that we can then hang on the rest of British history onto?
I think so. I think for me, certainly in the medieval period that my book's about, that's the basic political narrative, the who's in charge narrative. And that doesn't tell the full story, but it tells one of the main stories, and it leads you through it. In many ways, there are more important things to look at in terms of the lives of the majority of the people, but in terms of characters and story, that's what I was drawn to. And you can't also, one of the reasons my book ends in 1603, and one of the reasons is that after that, if you just talk about the kings and queens, that becomes less and less relevant, and that stops being even the main political story after 100 years or so.
I think that's so true, because if we're in this pod, we're going to try and just talk about trying to get a bit of a pecking order going. Mm-hmm. And actually, it's so hard to compare medieval monarchs with early modern and modern ones, because you end up having to go, well, was Elizabeth II better than Athelstan? And you're like, it is just, you're comparing two totally different entities, aren't you?
I certainly feel that if they swapped roles, they'd both be very unhappy. I think if Elizabeth II was trying to consolidate Anglo-Saxon control on a partly Viking-occupied island, I don't think that would have been her great strength. And similarly, I think he might have found it a bit frustrating, the endless duty and positivity, and he might just, at some point, can I slash someone to bits with a sword? Go, no, Your Majesty, just now take the posy of flowers and smile.
Whenever I write and think about kings and queens, there's our bizarre habit of starting the king list with William the Conqueror. It just is so strange, isn't it? And you've gone all the way back to the early medieval as well, haven't you?
Well, I thought if we're going to define a book, one of the ways you could define it is say it's about the kings and queens of England. And so you immediately say, okay, so England has to exist. And England didn't exist. I mean, obviously the physical space did, but no one called it England before the Anglo-Saxons arrived, because that term derives from then. So we can forget about the Romans. And similarly, after Elizabeth I, you got the same monarchy in charge of England and Scotland, and so it starts to be more Britain.
But the big problem we all face, isn't it, is who was the first king of England?
Yes.
It's a nightmare.
Well, it might be Athelstan. Yeah. It might be Edward the Elder. It's not Alfred the Great.
Sadly not.
But it's around then. As I say in the book, it's a sort of soft launch, the Kingdom of England.
That's a good way to put it.
It's a soft launch. We don't know who's in charge, but someone is. Who is that? Who knows?
Yeah. I feel like it went viral like a year or so ago of women on TikTok asking their boyfriends, husbands, how often do you think about the Roman Empire, and seeing how they will respond. And I feel like for those men who said they think about the Roman Empire all the time, that is the next level, is to think about the start of who was the first king of England.
Bro, yes. That's like you're zooming in now. Like, I don't have the mental space to zoom in anymore than not the Holy Roman Empire, because that shit was fucking nuts.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
The Roman Empire, where it was
the
just
actual
good old fashioned killing, conquering, and backstabbing.
Yeah.
Because the before the Vikings came, the Anglo-Saxons definitely had lots of different kingdoms and a vague sense that they're from the same cultural root, but no real sense that the notion of England is really forged in opposition to the Vikings.
Were you kind of drawn towards those early monarchs? I find them increasingly interesting, only because we overlooked them until quite recently. They just weren't part of our kind of national story.
I like it because it's so confusing.
Definitely.
You understand why there's been so much televising of the Tudors, because you sort of know where you are. There's a handful of easy characters to get a grip
And you can
on.
assume a bit of knowledge in the audience.
Yeah.
Everyone knows where they are.
But the Wars of the Roses, it's all over the place, and I even since writing the book, I've forgotten most of it.
Okay,
but
great.
the Plantagenets going into the two cadet branches of York and Lancaster, that's the big muddle of what basically happened in medieval England that I used writing this book to briefly get a sort of grip on. But the confusingness of it is attractive, and that's what all kingship is. Our notion of kings is partly Henry VIII, but apart from his big iconic figure, we're thinking of kings that were in that period. That's the proper period of kings. That's when all of the aesthetic of kingship derives from that time. They had crowns, they had shields, they had coats of arms, and that's what. And all of the pictures of King Arthur have him like that. Even though if he had existed, which he didn't, he was a millennium earlier and would have had very, very different clobber. Probably a bit of an old toga, and
clinging on to the remnant
half a gladius and a sandal.
Is writing history?
Okay.
Wow. So so it's one little bit that the rest of the world thinks of when we think of English kings. Like I said, Henry VIII.
Yeah. Who in the comment section, guys, please enlighten me. Who do they find under the parking lot? Who was buried under the parking lot? Which king? Because
good question.
They found one recently. Like, oh shit, there's the king underneath this parking lot. That dude, whoever that is, dope. End story. No one expected that.
Like, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah, no one expects to find an old king buried under the parking lot.
Yeah, I mean, if he had a big old thing of meat in his hand and was having his wife beheaded, then we know which one it was. But I'm sure it wasn't that one.
History book, sort of dad. Is that one of the dad sort of things to tick off? Like it's dad life, hashtag dad life. I mean, the reason I ask you about writing history books, it strikes me that one of your more famous alter egos, someone who you've had to struggle in the past to put distance between you and this fictional person. He wanted to write a book called Business Secrets of the Pharaohs, I think.
Yes. Well, look, I can't say.
Oh, that's right.
Oh my god, bro.
And he got it spelled wrong because it fell into the wrong hands. Oh, I remember that one. Business Secrets of the Pharaohs.
Oh man. I love that we get references, bro. I love that we get references.
Write a book called Business Secrets of the Pharaohs, I think.
Yes. Well, I can't say that I've entirely escaped the shadow of Mark Corrigan in writing a history book. This is a book that he might be interested in.
Well, I think so.
But But the thing is about him and me, we were young fogies, and now I'm gradually growing into the appropriate age for fogies.
That's as another young fogey. It's quite nice because all your friends suddenly join. You don't move. You remain as interested in Stalingrad as you were at 19.
Yeah.
But strangely, your sort of weird mates who are interested in like house music and other things start to, and then sometimes surpass you. Like I've got mates now who are like writing detailed descriptions. Their grandfather at the Battle of Passchendaele. I'm like, you've overshot the runway.
Yeah. Yes. What's your music collection looking like now?
Exactly. I love that people's different.
Yeah. Like you're definitely getting into that era with Wreck Nation, and like eventually I'm gonna get into smoking meat. That's gonna be my old man thing.
Yep.
Like I'm still gallivanting the world and eating a lot of stuff I shouldn't be eating, drinking way too much, and spending time with people I shouldn't spend time with.
Yep. And I've just slowed down. Listen, it started for me when the World War II fairy left this book that I never bought of World War II. I never bought this book, bro. I don't know who bought this book. I absorbed it out of the ether. Don't know where this book came from. Don't know whose it is, but it was on my bookshelf, and I'm like, that's odd. And then it started.
So that's why I'm the more annoying one of the two of us. It's because we have an older audience. You have gotten into that era. I will get there one day. Just be patient.
Just look at your listen as a rapidly aging man. I can tell you this. Start paying attention to your bookshelves, okay? Because then you'll start seeing smoked meat recipes, best way to smoke meat, smoked meat theory, and you're like, what is that about? And then it starts.
Or maybe I'm getting that way. Anyway, I won't take away from it any longer. I'm becoming self-aware now.
Perspectives on all the monarchs.
Actually looking like now.
Exactly. I love people's different perspectives on all the monarchs. Can we just start with anything that you are just sick of and you think are massively overrated?
I'm not keen on William the Conqueror.
Okay.
I'm not keen on William the Conqueror, and I'm not keen on Edward the Confessor.
Well,
now, I wouldn't say Edward the Confessor is massively overrated, but
no one likes him.
Well, I'm very glad to hear it, because it seems like lots of people like him. They allow him to call himself Edward the Confessor and talk about his holiness and his praying.
Absolutely useless man.
He was a useless man.
Totally.
He sowed the seeds of discord.
Absolutely. Do we not like William the Conqueror because you have a kind of nostalgic love for the Anglo-Saxon, sort of all a bit 19th century, a bit nostalgic for that? Or do you just think he was a right bastard who was just a violent psychopath?
Well, they were all right bastards, basically. In terms of the standard of conduct is woefully below what we'd expect, even of Hollywood. There were so many times in the Middle Ages where people are just waiting for this useless bastard to die, and very occasionally they go, well, it could be ages, even though it's the Middle Ages and people just drop dead for no reason all the time. We just can't wait for him to die. We're going to have to do something else.
Edward II, I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's just too long. He might not die for 30 years.
Yeah, we can't cope.
His father made old bones.
His dad made old bones, and his son did.
Richard II, similarly. Yeah. It's going to be too long before he dies. We're just going to have to put him in a castle and starve him.
So, William the Conqueror, you don't like him because you're affectionate.
You've got to pick a side, right? I mean, that may be that some academic historians would say you don't.
I think possibly.
But I think they've lost the joy. But I think the Battle of Hastings, one of the first things you get taught about, or I got taught about, and you've got to pick a side. Do you want to pick the invading Normans, or do you want to pick the Harold sitting on Senlac Hill? And I picked Harold. Most of the people in my class picked Harold, but turns out, sadly, spoiler alert for people who haven't yet bought the book, Harold loses.
Crikey.
And that's a bit of a shame. And it's one of the good reasons not to start your history of the kings and queens of England with William the Conqueror, because it's a bit of a pisser.
Harold's an attractive character, I think.
Yeah.
Man, I wish people like David Mitchell, the people with just are fountains of knowledge when it comes to certain subjects. I love meeting people. I've met one or two people like him in the UK, London, Cardiff. I think one. I can't remember where else, but I wish I knew the questions to ask when it comes to the subject matters of things like that. That's how you could spend a whole afternoon in a pub.
It takes a talent to be not just to be very smart and intelligent in a topic, but also when to allow that subject to allow itself into conversation.
Right.
Because a lot of times you're brilliant in a subject, but you lose the tact on when to hold back with your brilliance.
Right. You just go overboard. And I could see Mark Corrigan doing that. Not really David Mitchell, but Mark Corrigan. I could see that happening. And he has done that a couple of times.
Where someone asked him, so what about the Kings? And he just, I was like, whoa, bro. Give me some space.
Yeah.
He's very obviously had no birthright to be king, but that we feel more relaxed about that now, that we're not so keen on the whole notion of people being in charge because of a birthright. But he was professional. He was organised. He did everything right. and he would have won the Battle of Hastings if his army had listened to him.
And his brother Tostig was obviously such a horrible person.
Yeah.
Harold got rid of him. Yeah,
We all know families can be difficult, and I feel for Harold trying to deal with Tostig. And he's got a nice earldom in the north. Things are going nicely for him, but he pushes his luck, and I think Harold deals with it with great dignity.
So you're a Harold fan.
Yeah.
You are not a William fan. Anyone else overrated?
I think the Tudors in general are overrated because they're not, and their imagery is great. The portraits of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I in particular, that's great iconography, but they're a bit of an afterthought of medieval kingship, really. And I think in their time, England is essentially accepting its own mediocrity. Henry VIII, it's got to be said, he's been overcovered, but he is a lot of fun. I understand why he's had so much coverage, and in a way, looked at in terms of if you take the job of a king not to be to rule his own age, but to give lots of interesting stories to posterity, he has been an amazing content provider, and I do accept that he's fun, but I've had a bit of enough of him. And also, if you think about him for more than 5 minutes, he was so awful, unbearable. Almost you'd rather a complete tyrant. But the fact that he had a sort of an intelligent, thoughtful, intellectual side to him almost makes his tantrums and his
crushing insecurity,
all the more contemptible.
So you're a Blood and Thunder guy.
Okay, so I remember we did Oversimplified. He's a bit of a rock star and a bit of an asshole, and just like the guy you party with, but you watch your back behind him. You know what I mean?
He set forth the iconography of the Middle Ages, I guess, of it all, right? Yeah. He lived like a king.
He sure did, and he's the whole reason that England broke away from the Roman Catholic Church, is because he needed a son, and his own bank was not issuing sons to the customers of his many wives. Yep. So, but they didn't have the science back then to tell him that. So, yeah. But
okay.
Yeah, but still, I even how much I don't know about any of the monarchs, I still know enough about Henry VIII.
Yeah, and I don't know nothing about no Tudors. Nothing. I know it's a show now, right? A pretty successful show, I think.
Yeah.
I've heard about it. I know it exists, and I know it's referencing a point or family in time in history. That is it.
Yeah, I know that it's a chain of breakfast restaurants in West Virginia. Tudors.
Very nice. Very nice. All right.
That's it.
I mean, you like your team.
Yeah, all the more contemptible.
So you're a Blood and Thunder guy. I mean, you like a king. What was it, Henry IV of Navarre and of France said, I rule with my arse in my saddle and my sword in my hand. That's your archetype.
Well, that was the way to do it. That's what Henry II did, and he's one of the most effective medieval monarchs, albeit one who sort of met with a sad, lonely end.
Yeah.
Henry I was great, and he's a professional.
I like it. I agree.
He
got rid of his brothers.
Yeah. He usurped the throne brutally. Which is,
no, there was a terribly unfortunate hunting accident in the New Forest where poor Prince Harry saw his older brother William get killed very accidentally and not on purpose at all.
Well, he definitely bounced back quickly from his grief, and got in ahead of the elder brother. I mean, what a life!
One of life's losers.
Yeah,
one of history's losers.
Robert Curthose, who died. He was made very old bones, but spent most of his life in Cardiff Castle. And Cardiff wasn't the vibrant centre then that it is now. So I feel sorry for him. But no, Henry I, it just feels like he's professional. He got it. What you have to do, you have to be horrible. They were all horrible. You have to be willing to kill at a moment's notice. But if you do it with a rationale, you do it even-handedly, you don't have favourites, and you have some notion of the stable government you want to be heading towards, then it can work out. And he created a very peaceful kingdom, albeit through violence. And in those days, that's sort of as good as it gets. And also another thing he doesn't do that many of the other ones that vie for best king, they all do, is he didn't try and conquer too many other places. That puts a lot of pressure on the kingdom when the hundreds of years where every king of England is trying also to be king of France, and it's not really viable. But he said, no, I've got Normandy and England, and I'm going to stick.
Happy days.
Yeah.
Okay, so Tudor's overrated, William the Conqueror's overrated. Anybody else that you came to really think was... So Elizabeth Tudor usually tops the list, doesn't she? Elizabeth I.
She I suppose she is overrated. She wasn't amazing.
I struggle with her because sometimes I think, God, what amazing, and all that kind of clever politics. And then partly you think, well, Ireland was a disaster. She didn't solve any of the big problems. She delayed all the big problems. Didn't seem to solve any of them. So I struggle with her. So.
Well, the thing about her that people don't seem to say, but strikes me, and it's a success of her brand building that people don't say it, is she was just very, very cautious.
Yeah.
And she inherited the throne at a time where she was the daughter of Anne Boleyn. The country is hugely divided, religiously speaking. She was in an extremely insecure position and had had a tricky life up to then. So I understand the caution. It's an intelligent person's response. But she sort of knew she was on a sticky wicket and behaved like it, really. And she was, repelling the Armada went well, but everything she actively pushed out into the world was essentially underfunded and nervously done.
Well, and she underfunded the poor old sailors who fought in the Armada as well, to their great detriment. So,
well, she sort of launched her own Armada, didn't she?
Oh yeah,
a couple of years later, that went at least as badly.
We've forgotten that one. Yeah. What's our? Dare I ask? Have we got top three?
Well, I'd have to. I think Henry II was pretty amazing.
I think so too.
And he held together. I mean, most of France as well as England, and it's all down to energy. And also, I think he wasn't great at dealing with his own family, because the relentlessness with which his sons tried to overthrow him to me, it suggests that he must have been a difficult chap, domestically speaking.
But
he's
Henry
good.
First and second.
Yeah. But I'm wondering about. Well, the big two in terms of trying to conquer France are Henry V and Edward III.
Yeah.
They both tried with all their might to take over France, and they both nearly succeeded. But the whole notion of trying to take over France is so ridiculous that can you count them great kings for that? They've devoted themselves to something that was a horrible experience for both of the armies and the poor French. I mean, you sort of think about all the famous battles of the 100 Years' War, Poitiers, Crécy, and Agincourt. These great victories where outnumbered English armies destroy huge French armies because the French armies have got a ridiculous strategy. It makes the English the underdogs, and it makes us feel all good and plucky. But the reality is all of this is happening in France. The reason the English are so outnumbered is that they have left home in order to destroy the lives, livelihoods, crops and villages of people in a neighbouring country who've done them no harm. So that...
Oh, man. This is what this is what I'm talking about, man. Is like this time in history was just nuts. What was going on? It's just like this person attacked this person, everyone's trying to conquer everyone. And it's just like my head spins. Absolutely crazy. But the history is pretty phenomenal. Yeah. Like, it's very interesting to say the least. If there was like I guess that's something where we have to dive into like a proper timeline of the monarchy, because it gets like madness towards the end. For my brain to try to wrap around it.
Yeah. Feel free, anybody watching, to comment below some video ideas. Don't put links; those get blocked.
Yep.
Titles, please.
Please.
And thank you.
suddenly slightly turns around the whole plucky underdog thing to say, no, what they are is nasty thieving bandits. And, you know, sometimes a burglar will be in a house and find himself outnumbered by the people that live there. But that doesn't make him plucky.
I think you're setting quite a difficult set of parameters, because you like a thug, but you don't.
Well,
But you don't
thugs
want them
and
to
thugs.
be. Yeah, exactly. But
know.
you don't want them to be. You like them to be sort of thuggish within a kind of national community rather than invading the next door one.
Yes, well, I think what I'm expecting. Firstly, you say I like a thug. I think the
let's clear
thuggish
this
nature of government then was regrettable.
Yeah.
But it's all thuggish.
Yeah.
So you can choose the sort of bonkers thugs that you don't know what they're going to do next, the more even-handed thugs, the thugs that fail in their aims, the more successful thugs. And so on the basis that they're all thugs, I'm picking the even-handed successful thugs over the unsuccessful capricious thugs.
Fair, that's very clear. I have a soft spot for Henry III.
How eloquently that is put.
Yes, yes. The even-handed thug.
Yeah, even-handed thug. That's the worst rapper name ever.
Yep, it would be.
Yeah.
Capricious thugs.
Fair, that's very clear. I have a soft spot for Henry III, who I don't think was thuggish enough. But
he's certainly, his worst enemy wouldn't call him a thug.
No.
You're right. No. Henry III and indeed Richard II and Ethelred the Unready, the unusual thing, a medieval king that doesn't really want to go to war.
Henry VI. Poor Henry VI.
And Henry VI, he's another one. But yeah, he was, I mean, he had more problems than that. You know, nowadays, we don't want our leaders starting wars. In those days, if you didn't want to ride into battle, it's a big part of the job description that you're not willing to cover.
What makes good king or queen? I mean, the organised violence side of it aside, is there anything else?
I think all of the things that we expect from government today, you've just got to ignore that. They're not trying for any of it. They're not trying for peace. On the contrary, they're waging war. In terms of education and healthcare, they're not interested. Forget about it. So all you can expect is stability. That's the good kings provide stability, the bad kings don't. And that stability comes from being predictable in your actions and firm and not having favourites. And I think that's why the people, Henry I was particularly good at that. He's even-handed. He didn't have a clique. The worst kings, the ones that caused the most trouble, Richard II, Edward II, Henry VI, have favourites.
You were talking about kingship like they don't have human bodies themselves. So I now, as I get older, I realise how different I am at various different stages in my life. And these people, as you mentioned, like Edward III, they're trying to be Edward III, but you can be Edward III as a young man, but then you've also got to be Edward III as a guy crippled with musculoskeletal pain, and it's fascinating, isn't it? How they age, and then that changes the nature of their rule.
Yes, and perhaps we expect too much of them. Yeah. And but one of the biggest mistakes I think Henry I made was at the end of his reign, when he caused a rift between himself and Geoffrey of Anjou and Matilda, his daughter, who was, his designated heir. And because he basically refused to give Geoffrey some castles that had been promised to him. And that is an old man clinging on to all of his possessions and telling himself he's frightened that if he gives these castles to Geoffrey, that's going to start Geoffrey trying to take over Normandy, which I think there's no evidence for at all. But the fear he's feeling really is of death. But he projects that onto his son-in-law. And as a result of that rift, that gave Stephen, the next king, the excuse to claim that Henry I didn't really want Matilda to inherit the throne. And that causes 20 years of civil war. And that's the product of the changing mentality of an aging man. And obviously Edward III, he completely outlived his faculties, and that was a shame as well. He'd been this great general and quite a good leader and clearly an effective father because his family liked him and had a strong marriage with his queen, but then she died and he starts to lose his grip and is very much in the thrall of his lover, and the country starts going bankrupt because he's still trying to fight a war in France, and it's a very, very sad end to a very glorious reign.
I think wives are important, and they're often overlooked, aren't they? I think Henry I had a very good wife, and Henry II had a remarkable wife. And as you say, but I think that those are some of the details that we can ignore, perhaps, as traditionally men have written about them through the kind of military lens.
Yeah, and we don't hear so much about the queens, the queen consort.
Speaking of amazing wives, we've got Eleanor of Aquitaine we kind of mentioned, but then Emma of Normandy is fascinating, isn't she? Being wife of 2 kings.
Emma of Normandy was married initially to Ethelred the Unready. She was his second wife. His first wife was called Elfiefu, and so he made Emma change her name to Elfiefu. Made things easier for him. But anyway, when he died, she then married the next king, but one, Canute. And so she's from Normandy, and she's married into the Anglo-Saxon royal house and then the Danish royal house. And her son by Ethelred the Unready, Edward the Confessor, was a later king. Her son by Canute, Harthacnut, was later king. She was a major sort of power node at that time, and she kicks off the whole relationship between England and Normandy, and we know where that led. And so we don't have any of her words. We don't really know what she was thinking or saying, but she was right at the center of things and an amazing survivor. So yeah, it's a sort of sign that there are powerful women doing things as well, but we're not necessarily as aware of them as we should be. When
you're sitting there in modern Britain, writing away, do you think these men and women, did they matter? Like, the older I get, the more or is it all just science and engineering and microbes and do you think that the people in charge make a difference?
Well, yes, I wish I knew. They definitely.
I'm expecting an actual comprehensive answer right now.
They definitely make a difference in the short term. But here's the big question in terms of the period I've done. You've got, for a long time in the Anglo-Saxon period, all the relationships from England are with Scandinavian kingdoms because of the Vikings. And you have King Canute, who is basically rules England and much of Scandinavia. And it sort of feels like that's England's orbit. And then suddenly a few of the right people die, and that all changes, and William the Conqueror comes over, and England's orbit is all France. And then you have Henry II, and it's almost like the whole direction the country's looking in swivels round. Was that inevitable? Would that have happened if
Canute's kids hadn't been so bloody useless?
Well, yes, if he'd had more effective heirs, or if William the Conqueror had lost at Hastings, which could easily have happened. Harold the Godwinson, very much more Scandinavian looking. Would that trend have continued, or was the impact on England of Normandy and by extension France inevitable? That cultural power was a force beyond the control of any man or men. So without William the Conqueror, would the Anglo-Saxon royal house still have basically been dealing with France 100 years later? And you see how I've avoided answering your question by just reposing it.
What a pro.
That's a skill right there. That is a skill.
Yeah.
But it's not a question I ever thought about. I'm just sitting here absorbing right now.
It's interesting. I mean, because like what he said, in the short term, it didn't matter, but in the long term, it laid the groundwork for what was to come. Yeah. The relationships, the alliances, even the failures set up the trajectories, of where it is now. So it's pretty interesting to see the insane past of what was left after each ruler, each king left the throne. What happened, because it all builds. My biggest question, and granted, I am obviously not the subject matter professional on this. I still don't understand why it's not a king and queen. Like I don't understand that, and maybe it's been explained to us in the comments. But I always thought in my head, king, his wife is the queen, and the queen's married to the dude. He is the king. I just thought that was like the couple, like, title.
Yeah, but it's king and queen consort, or queen and king consort, I guess.
Dude. Royal dude. That's a royal dude.
Yeah, that's the royal chick.
Yeah, royal chick, royal dude, bro. Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, but yeah, that question, if you guys could answer that, because I cannot wrap my head around it, and that's just because of Hollywood. That's why.
Yeah.
That's why I'm making that assumption. I have no idea.
Yeah, Hollywood.
Yeah, I could be a politician, couldn't I?
Should be. Because he wasted it. Best monarch to go for a beer with?
Monarch to go for a beer with, I think young Henry VIII.
Oh, okay.
I think young Henry VIII, he'd be good company, but I wouldn't trust him.
Best monarch to be your brother-in-law, to marry your sister?
To marry your sister? That is an incredibly specific question.
Yes.
Now,
So I'd like my brother-in-law is not listening to this. He's
now
not
going to have to. Best Edward IV. Yeah.
Bit of a shagger.
He was a bit of a shagger. I tell you what he did for his wife's family.
Oh, okay. That's a very good way of looking at it.
Absolutely showered them with wealth. But also, I think Edward IV is slightly underrated as well, because he was quite capable.
If David Mitchell's sister is listening to this podcast, you are there.
I don't have a sister.
Well, there you go. That's why. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. She is there simply to bring honours and jewels upon the rest of the family. I love it.
I think they would have said, that family, that he made an okay brother-in-law. Yeah,
that's true. And then his little brother came along and had them all killed.
Yeah.
Best monarch to go on a stag night team building exercise on a windswept island off the coast.
Right, now what do you want from someone like that? You're on a team building. I mean, if you're me, you want the monarch who will guide you to the latest pub that has the nearest pub that has nice rooms, so you can avoid the whole team building exercise. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think maybe, you see, Edward IV would be quite good for that sort of thing. He liked his creature comforts. I mean, they killed him in the end. But I'm going to try and think of someone. Richard the Lionheart. Okay. There you go. Yeah. He was good. He was good at logistics, and I think if you could say, if you could tell him it was the holy thing to do, you need to say, we need to go on a crusade to find the pub.
He did well on Cyprus, which is an island.
We're going on a crusade to the next pub.
I love that. Oh, that's great. That's I could imagine that.
So there, I guess so. David Mitchell, thank you very much for coming on this show. What is the book called?
It's called Unruly.
Unruly.
And it does all of the kings of England, from the Anglo-Saxons to Elizabeth I.
All of your medieval kingship needs will be met.
And it has colour photography.
What?
Yeah, although no photographs of the actual kings and queens, sadly. But that's because photography wasn't invented in time. It's not my fault. Yeah. So instead you have the dreadful drawings that were done of them by various medieval monks.
Very good. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
David, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Well, it's good to have you.
When you say live, this isn't live.
No, it's not live.
No. Live recording.
Did I say live? Yeah,
you said live recording.
I mean,
that's actually a contradiction in terms.
Well, we're
live now, but we may be dead by the time people watch this.
It's Naz live. Thanks for watching this video on the History Hit YouTube channel.
All right. That was I feel like I learned something. I learned stuff about the monarchs that made them human and made them more digestible.
Yeah,
in terms of their information, we're not cannibals around here.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's just interesting. Like, this shit just absolutely intrigues me. It's so intriguing because I know it's so complicated. There were a lot of moving parts then. In that era that he's referencing, that he wrote the book around. And it's so complicated that it's almost like I would love have the mental wherewithal to digest it and
Yeah.
and learn. But I
Yeah.
would open that book and be like, bro,
Yeah.
that's too big. It's like trying to climb Mount Everest. Like
Right.
like after you climb Mount Everest, you look over and like, shit, this was just practice Everest. There's Everest.
Yeah. And not even changing up your diet to have more events to get that book done with. It wouldn't help.
Exactly. But no, it's cool, man. I'm glad that at least I know that he wrote a book, and maybe eventually, the older I get, right now I'm stuck in my old man World War II phase. But maybe when I get 10 years older, I'll start ripping open the empires.
Maybe.
Holy and or just Roman.
Yeah. And then go to the Anglo-Saxon era.
Yeah. It's just baby steps, guys. Starting me off with World War II.
Yeah. That's a good start. But anyway, this was interesting. Keep some like I said earlier, titles of stuff that explains this timeline a little better.
Yeah. This is so different than what we've had on the channel. Like, I want to say ever. It's just like, it's just new because familiar face on the channel that we both absolutely love. Subject matter is new on this channel for sure.
Yeah, and if anybody was gonna get it into us, it would probably be David Mitchell.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Anyway, y'all, thanks for watching. Subscribe, watch another video. Thank you, channel members. What now, Dan?
Unplug, and don't forget to let me know what king was in the parking lot underneath.
Yes.
Yep.